The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Maria Santos pulled up the metal door of storage unit 247 in Phoenix, Arizona. The smell hit her first, rotting food, mildew, and something else she couldn't identify. Her heart sank. $50 was her grocery money for the week, and all she saw was trash bags and broken furniture. But Maria wasn't just any struggling single mom. Before her husband died and her world collapsed, she'd been a forensic accountant who'd helped the FBI track dirty money through corporate mazes. Now, working 3 jobs to keep her kids fed, those skills seemed useless. As she began sorting through the mess, her trained eye caught something odd, a leather briefcase wedged behind a moldy couch. Inside were documents, photos, and USB drives that made her blood run cold, names she recognized from news headlines. Bank accounts with impossible numbers, evidence of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. Maria realized she was holding proof that could bring down senators, judges, and CEOs, or get her family killed. But why was someone keeping evidence of their own crimes? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria's hands trembled as she rifled through the briefcase contents. Bank statements from Cayman Islands accounts, wire transfer receipts totaling millions, photographs of men in expensive suits shaking hands in what appeared to be parking garages and abandoned warehouses. Her forensic training kicked in automatically, cataloging details even as her panic rose. The first document that caught her attention bore the letterhead of Meridian Industries, a defense contractor she'd seen in the news just last week. Senator Richard Blackwood had been defending a controversial military contract award to the company. The paper in her hands showed a payment of $2 million to an offshore account listed under R. Blackwood Consulting. Her phone buzzed. A text from her babysitter, running late picking up Sophia from soccer. Dinner? Reality crashed back. Her 8-year-old daughter would be wondering why Mommy was late again. Her 12-year-old son, Diego, was probably already home from school, doing homework at their tiny kitchen table. They needed her. They needed normal. They needed groceries, not whatever dangerous game she'd stumbled into. Maria shoved the briefcase under her arm and grabbed a few salvageable items. A lamp that might work. Some books that weren't water-damaged. Her car, a 15-year-old Honda with a rattling engine, felt like sanctuary as she locked the storage unit behind her. During the 20-minute drive home to their apartment complex, her mind raced through possibilities. Someone had abandoned this storage unit deliberately. The facility manager had mentioned the previous renter died in a car accident 3 months ago. That's why it went to auction. But what kind of person keeps evidence of their own corruption? Unless it wasn't their corruption at all. The pieces clicked together with the same satisfaction she used to feel solving complex financial puzzles for the Bureau. This wasn't a criminal's insurance policy, this was someone's life insurance. Someone who'd discovered the conspiracy and gathered evidence, planning to expose it. Someone who'd died before they got the chance. Their apartment building came into view, faded stucco walls and a pool that hadn't worked since they moved in. Maria tucked the briefcase into a reusable grocery bag, trying to look casual as she climbed the stairs to apartment 2B. "Mommy!" Sophia launched herself into Maria's arms the moment she opened the door. Her daughter's soccer uniform was grass-stained, and her ponytail had gone lopsided, but her smile was radiant. "How was practice, Mija?" "I scored 2 goals. Coach says I might make varsity when I get to high school." Sophia's eyes were bright with possibility, unmarked by the financial stress that kept Maria awake most nights. Diego looked up from his math homework. At 12, he was already showing signs of growing up too fast, helping with Sophia, never asking for things they couldn't afford, shouldering responsibility that should have been hers alone. "Hey, Mom, how was the storage thing? Find anything good?" Maria set down the grocery bag containing evidence that could topple governments and smiled at her son. "Maybe. We'll see." While Sophia chatted about soccer and Diego finished homework, Maria made spaghetti with the last jar of sauce in their pantry. Normal motions, normal conversations, but her mind kept returning to the briefcase now hidden in her bedroom closet. As she tucked Sofia into bed and helped Diego with a math problem, Maria felt the weight of her discovery settling around her like a heavy coat. She'd spent 2 years since David's death fighting to keep their small family afloat. Now she possessed information that could change everything, but change often meant danger, and danger was a luxury she couldn't afford. The apartment grew quiet after the children fell asleep. Maria sat at their kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee and stared at her reflection in the dark window. Tomorrow, she would have to decide what kind of person she was going to be. The lock clicked open with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for her touch. Maria took a deep breath and rolled up the metal door, wincing at the screech of rusted hinges that echoed through the narrow corridor of storage units. The smell hit her first, a mixture of mildew, dust, and something else she couldn't identify, something vaguely sweet and unsettling. The unit stretched back about 10 feet, packed floor to ceiling with black garbage bags, cardboard boxes with water-stained corners, and what looked like old furniture draped in yellowed sheets. "Jesus," she whispered, pulling out her phone's flashlight. The overhead bulb in the unit had burned out long ago, leaving everything in shadow. Her heart sank as she surveyed the chaos. This wasn't the treasure trove she desperately hoped for. It looked like someone had simply used the unit as a dumping ground. Still, $50 was $50, and she was committed now. Maria stepped inside, careful not to trip over a pile of magazines that had spilled from a torn bag. She grabbed the nearest box and dragged it into the light of the corridor. Inside, she found a collection of romance novels with cracked spines, a few ceramic figurines that might fetch a couple dollars at a yard sale, and a tarnished jewelry box that played a haunting melody when opened. The second box yielded children's clothes, too small for Emma but in decent condition. She could probably get $10 or $15 for the lot online. The third contained old VHS tapes and a few DVDs, not worthless but hardly the windfall she needed. 2 hours passed. Maria's back ached from bending and lifting, and her hopes continued to deflate with each disappointing discovery. The unit seemed to contain the remnants of someone's life, ordinary, everyday objects that had once meant something to someone, but now felt abandoned and forgotten. She was about to call it quits when she noticed something odd. In the back corner, partially hidden behind an old dresser, several bags looked different from the rest. While most of the garbage bags were black and clearly meant for disposal, these were heavy-duty contractor bags, sealed with duct tape and stacked with deliberate care. Maria maneuvered around the furniture, her curiosity piqued despite her exhaustion. The bags were heavier than expected, and when she dragged the first one into the light, she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. A small tear in the plastic revealed not household junk, but what looked like files and papers. She peeled back the duct tape carefully, her hands trembling slightly. Inside, manila folders were packed tight, each one thick with documents. She pulled out the top folder and opened it, squinting in the dim light. The letterhead made her stomach drop. Blackwood Development Corporation. She recognized the name. They were the company that had built half the new construction in town over the past 5 years, including the luxury condos that had displaced 3 family-owned businesses on Main Street. But these weren't ordinary business documents. Even with her limited understanding of corporate paperwork, Maria could see that something was wrong. The papers were filled with financial statements, bank routing numbers, and what appeared to be records of cash transactions. Large cash transactions. Her hands shook as she flipped through page after page of meticulous records. Names she didn't recognize were linked to dollar amounts that made her head spin. 500,000 here, 2 million there. And scattered throughout were copies of building permits, zoning applications, and city council meeting minutes, all bearing the signature of Mayor Richardson. Maria's breath caught. She knew Richardson personally. He'd been her high school guidance counselor before entering politics. He'd helped her apply for scholarships, had even written recommendation letters. The idea that he might be involved in something shady seemed impossible. But the evidence was right there in black and white. Payment records that suggested money had changed hands in exchange for favorable zoning decisions. building permits approved in record time for projects that should have taken months to clear, and in the margins of several documents, handwritten notes in red ink that made her blood run cold. Problem resolved, T's, and witness eliminated, situation contained. She grabbed another folder, then another. Each one contained more of the same, a careful record of corruption that reached from Blackwood Development through various city officials all the way up to the state level. This wasn't just local politics, this was organized crime disguised as legitimate business. Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom, when are you coming home? I'm hungry." The simple message snapped her back to reality. She looked around the storage unit with new eyes, suddenly aware of how isolated she was, how vulnerable. If these documents were real, and they certainly looked authentic, then someone had gone to great lengths to hide them. Someone who wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who discovered their secrets. Her hands trembling, Maria carefully placed the folders back in the bag and sealed it. Whatever she'd stumbled into, it was bigger than anything she'd ever imagined. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have as Maria carried it to her car, her hands trembling despite the warm afternoon sun. She'd shoved everything back into the storage unit and locked it, but kept the envelope. Something told her she needed to examine its contents away from prying eyes, though she couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be watching. Back in her apartment, Maria waited until Sophia was absorbed in her coloring books before spreading the envelope's contents across her kitchen table. Her breath caught as she realized what she was looking at. Photographs, dozens of them, some in color, others black and white. The images showed men in expensive suits, meeting in what appeared to be a construction site. She recognized the location immediately. The old Riverside development project that had been front-page news 3 years ago. The project that had mysteriously stalled after a city councilman died in a car accident. Maria's nursing background had taught her to notice details, and these photos were full of them. Timestamps, license plates clearly visible, faces that looked familiar from newspaper articles and local television. She found herself staring at one particular image, a heavy-set man in a navy suit, handing a briefcase to someone whose face was partially obscured by shadows. "Mama, I'm hungry." Sophia's voice made Maria jump, quickly gathering the photos. "Of course, baby. Let me make you a snack." As she prepared peanut butter crackers for Sophia, Maria's mind raced. The dead councilman, Robert Hendricks, had been investigating irregularities in city development contracts before his death. The official report called it a tragic accident, brake failure on a rainy night, but these photos suggested something else entirely. She recognized another face from the images, Vincent Caruso, whose construction company had won several major city contracts despite not being the lowest bidder. And there was Mayor Davidson, though he looked younger in these pictures, probably from when he was still a city councilman himself. After Sophia went to bed, Maria spread everything out again, this time including the handwritten notes. The cramped writing was difficult to read, but she could make out dates, times, and amounts, large amounts. The word kickbacks appeared several times, along with Hendricks getting close and needs to be handled. One note made her blood run cold. RH accident arranged, file secured, clean up remaining evidence. Maria sat back in her chair, her heart pounding. Robert Hendricks hadn't died in an accident, he'd been murdered, and whoever had owned this storage unit had documented the entire conspiracy. She thought about the storage unit auction. The auctioneer had mentioned that the owner died recently, leaving no next of kin. Had this person been trying to expose the truth? Is that why they were dead? Her phone buzzed with a text from her ex-husband. "Sophia's birthday is next month. Hope you can afford something nice for once." The cruel reminder of her financial situation made her stomach clench. Here she was, holding what might be worth a fortune or a death sentence. These photos and documents were evidence of corruption that went to the highest levels of city government. The kind of evidence that newspapers paid big money for. The kind that could set her and Sophia up for life. But it was also the kind that got people killed. Maria walked to her window and peered through the blinds at the parking lot below. Everything looked normal. The same old cars, the same broken streetlight, the same overflowing dumpster that the landlord never emptied on time. But now, every shadow seemed threatening. She returned to the table and picked up one of the clearest photographs. Vincent Caruso was shaking hands with someone in an expensive suit, someone she now realized was Deputy Police Chief Morrison, the same Morrison who had overseen the investigation into Hendrik's death. The corruption ran deeper than she'd imagined. Police, politicians, contractors, all working together, all with something to lose if this evidence ever came to light. Maria looked towards Sophia's bedroom, where her daughter slept peacefully, unaware that their lives had just become infinitely more complicated. She could turn this over to the FBI, but who could she trust? How high up did this conspiracy go? Or she could try to sell it, find a journalist willing to pay for the story, use the money to give Sophia the life she deserved. The third option was the one that terrified her most. Someone would discover she had this evidence before she could decide what to do with it. She gathered everything back into the envelope, her hands steadier now. Whatever choice she made, she needed more information first. Tomorrow, she would return to the storage unit and search more thoroughly. There had to be more evidence, more pieces to this puzzle. As she hid the envelope behind her bedroom dresser, Maria made herself a promise. Whatever it took, she would protect Sophia, even if it meant going up against people who had already killed to keep their secrets buried. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have as Maria carried it to her car, her hands trembling slightly from adrenaline rather than the cold. She'd shoved everything back into the storage unit exactly as she'd found it, but kept the envelope and its contents. The Polaroid of the bloodied concrete and the handwritten note burned in her mind like after-images. Back in her apartment, Maria waited until Tommy was asleep before spreading the envelope's contents across her kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light. Besides the Polaroid and note, there were 3 more photographs, all showing the same concrete floor from different angles, dark stains clearly visible, a business card for Chen's construction with an address she didn't recognize, and a folded piece of paper with what looked like coordinates written in the same careful handwriting as the note. She turned the business card over. Someone had written "Ask about the foundation work, July 2019" in faded blue ink. Maria's heart hammered as she stared at the evidence. Someone had died. Someone had been killed, and these photos documented the aftermath. The careful way everything was packaged, hidden beneath layers of junk. This wasn't some sick joke or movie prop. This was real. She picked up her phone 3 times to call the police, and 3 times set it back down. What would she tell them? That she'd bought a storage unit and found some photos? They'd ask questions she couldn't answer. They'd want to know who the unit belonged to, and she'd realized with growing dread that she didn't even know the previous owner's name. The auction company had simply listed it as Unit 47, default payment. More troubling was what Detective Rivera had said about asking questions. If powerful people had killed to keep this buried, what would they do to a desperate single mother who'd stumbled onto their secret? Maria made coffee with shaking hands, then sat back down at the table. She needed to think logically. The storage unit had been abandoned, which meant either the person who hid this evidence was dead, in prison, or had disappeared. The photos looked several years old based on their quality and slight fading. July 2019, almost 5 years ago. She opened her laptop and searched for Chen's construction, along with the address from the business card. Nothing came up. She tried variations of the name and finally found a brief mention in a local newspaper archive from 2019, Chen's Construction, which handled foundation work for several municipal projects, has ceased operations following owner David Chen's sudden departure from the area. Sudden departure. Maria's stomach clenched. The coordinates were her next lead. She plugged them into Google Maps and watched as a location loaded. A stretch of undeveloped land about 20 miles outside the city, near what looked like industrial buildings. The satellite view showed concrete structures, heavy equipment, and the telltale signs of construction work. Maria zoomed in, trying to match what she saw on screen with the photos on her table. The concrete in the pictures could have been anywhere, a basement, a foundation, a warehouse floor, but those coordinates had been written down for a reason. A soft sound from Tommy's room made her freeze, just him rolling over in his sleep, but it reminded her of what was at stake. Her son needed stability, needed his mother to make smart choices. Getting involved in a years-old murder case wasn't smart. But the eviction notice was still stuck to her refrigerator. 2 weeks. The storage unit had cost her $50 she couldn't afford to lose, and so far all she'd found was evidence of a crime instead of anything she could sell. Unless... Maria stared at the photos again, this time with a different perspective. Someone had killed to keep this secret buried. That meant it was worth something. The question was, worth something to whom? She could try to find out who had owned the storage unit, trace it back to whoever had hidden this evidence. Maybe they were still alive, still free, and would pay to get these photos back. Or maybe someone else would pay even more to see them. A victim's family, a journalist, a prosecutor who'd never been able to close a case. It was dangerous thinking, she knew. Blackmail was a crime, and she was a single mother who couldn't afford to go to jail. But desperation made people consider options they'd never normally contemplate. Maria gathered the photos and papers, slipping them back into the manila envelope. She needed more information before she could decide anything. Tomorrow, she'd drive out to those coordinates and see what she could find, maybe visit the area where Chen's construction used to operate. She hid the envelope inside a cookbook on her shelf, somewhere Tommy would never look, and tried to get some sleep. But she lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and wondering whether she'd found her family's salvation or signed their death warrant. Either way, there was no going back now. Maria's hands trembled as she stared at the photographs scattered across her kitchen table. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across the images, making them seem even more sinister in the quiet of her apartment. Emma was finally asleep after hours of restless tossing, and the silence felt oppressive. She picked up one of the clearest photos, a man in an expensive suit shaking hands with someone whose face was partially obscured by shadow. The timestamp showed a date from 3 years ago. Behind them, she could make out what looked like shipping containers and industrial equipment. The setting was clearly a warehouse or dock, somewhere official business probably shouldn't have been conducted in secret. Her laptop hummed to life as she opened it, the blue glow adding to the kitchen's eerie atmosphere. Maria had never considered herself particularly tech-savvy, but desperation was a powerful motivator. She started with a reverse image search on the clearest photo, hoping the internet might reveal something about the man in the suit. The results made her stomach drop. Senator Richard Hawthorne. She knew that name, had seen it in headlines about infrastructure bills and waterfront development projects. A powerful man with connections that reached into every corner of the city's political machine. Maria leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. If Senator Hawthorne was in these photos conducting what appeared to be clandestine meetings, then whatever she'd stumbled upon was far more dangerous than she'd imagined. Her initial thought about drug deals seemed almost quaint now. She examined more photos, cross-referencing faces with online searches. 2 more men emerged with identities, a city planning commissioner and someone listed as a maritime shipping executive. The web of connections was becoming clearer, and none of it looked legitimate. The documents proved even more revealing. Financial records showed money moving through a complex network of shell companies, all tied to waterfront development projects that had been fast-tracked through city approval processes. The amounts were staggering, millions of dollars changing hands with little oversight or documentation. Maria found herself holding what appeared to be a ledger, handwritten entries detailing payments to various officials. City inspectors, zoning board members, even police officers, all receiving regular payments from companies that seemed to exist only on paper. The corruption was systematic, reaching into every level of government that could influence lucrative development deals. As she photographed each page with her phone, creating her own digital backup, Maria's mind raced through the possibilities. This evidence could bring down dozens of powerful people. It could also get her killed if the wrong people discovered she had it. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. It was just her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, asking if everything was okay since she'd heard footsteps late at night. Maria typed back a quick reassurance, but the interruption reminded her how exposed she was. She gathered the most damning evidence and tucked it into a manila envelope, then hid it inside an old cookbook on her shelf. The rest went back into the box, which she slid under her bed. It wasn't sophisticated security, but it would have to do until she figured out her next move. Sleep was impossible. Maria lay in bed staring at the ceiling, weighing her options. She could take the evidence to the police, but the documents suggested several officers were already compromised. The FBI seemed like the obvious choice, but would they believe a desperate single mother who'd found evidence in a storage unit? And how long would it take them to act while she remained vulnerable? The other option was more immediate, but far more dangerous. She could try to leverage the evidence directly, approach one of the implicated parties, and demand payment for her silence. The money could solve all her problems, Emma's medical bills, rent, food, everything. But it would also make her a blackmailer, and people this powerful didn't typically negotiate with threats. Around 3 in the morning, Maria heard a sound that made her blood freeze. Footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment, slow and deliberate. She held her breath, listening as they paused outside her door. The footsteps continued past, but the message was clear. She was being watched. She crept to the window and peered through the blinds at the street below. A dark sedan sat parked across from her building, its occupant barely visible in the driver's seat. It hadn't been there when she'd come home from the storage unit. Maria's chest tightened with panic. Somehow, someone already knew, whether they'd tracked her from the storage facility or discovered the previous owner's identity through other means. Her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. She needed help, and she needed it fast. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford when everyone seemed to have a price. As dawn approached, Maria made her decision. She would contact a journalist, someone with enough credibility and protection to make the story public before anyone could silence her. It was risky, but keeping the secret was becoming more dangerous than revealing it. The photographs spread across Maria's kitchen table like a toxic constellation, each image more damning than the last. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she couldn't stop staring at the evidence before her. Detective Raymond Walsh's handwritten notes filled the margins of police reports, detailing payoffs, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation. The deeper she read, the more her hands trembled. A sharp knock at the front door made her heart slam against her ribs. Maria quickly gathered the photographs, shoving them back into the manila envelope. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Just a minute," she called, her voice barely steady. She tucked the envelope under a stack of unpaid bills and smoothed her hair before approaching the door. Through the peephole, she saw a man in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the morning humidity. "Ms. Vasquez? I'm Detective Carl Morrison with the Metro Police." He held up a badge, his smile practiced and cold. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about a storage unit you recently purchased." Maria's blood turned to ice. She forced herself to breathe normally as she opened the door, keeping the chain latched. "I'm sorry, what is this regarding?" "Nothing serious, ma'am. Just routine follow-up." There was some concern about items that might have been stolen from the previous owner. His eyes were pale blue, calculating. "May I come in?" "I'd rather talk out here if that's okay. My daughter is still sleeping." The lie came surprisingly easily. Sophia was at school, but every instinct screamed at Maria not to let this man inside her home. Morrison's smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Of course. I understand you purchased Unit 247 at Secure Store on Maple Street?" "That's right. Find anything interesting?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Maria studied his face, noting the expensive watch, the manicured nails, the way he held himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. This wasn't routine, and he wasn't here about stolen property. Just old clothes and junk, mostly. I donated what I could and threw the rest away." She kept her voice level, casual. "Why? Was there supposed to be something valuable?" "You never know what people leave behind." Morrison pulled out a business card, extending it toward her. "If you remember anything unusual, anything at all, please give me a call. Sometimes people hide things in storage units, thinking they're safe." Maria took the card, noting how his fingers lingered against hers for a moment too long. "Of course, Detective, but honestly, there was nothing worth keeping." "I'm sure you're right." He stepped back, but his gaze swept past her into the apartment. "Beautiful place you have here. Must be expensive, raising a daughter on your own in this neighborhood." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maria's grip tightened on the doorframe. "We manage just fine." "I'm sure you do. You seem like a smart woman, Ms. Vasquez. Smart enough to know that sometimes the best thing to do with unwanted items is to dispose of them properly, completely." Their eyes met, and Maria saw something that made her skin crawl. This man had killed before. She was certain of it. "Well," she said, forcing another smile, "like I said, everything's already been thrown away or donated. Nothing left to dispose of." Morrison nodded slowly. "Excellent. That's exactly what I hoped to hear." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Ms. Vasquez? My department keeps track of all storage unit auctions in the city. We have excellent records of who buys what, when they visit their units, everything really. It's amazing how much we can see with today's technology." He walked away without another word, leaving Maria standing in her doorway with her heart pounding. She watched until his black sedan disappeared around the corner before closing and locking the door, engaging both deadbolts and the chain. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown number. Hope your daughter has a good day at Lincoln Elementary. Walk home is only 6 blocks. Lots can happen in 6 blocks." Maria's knees buckled. She slumped against the door, phone trembling in her hands. They knew where Sophia went to school. They knew her walking route. The message was clear: cooperate, or your daughter pays the price. She rushed back to the kitchen, pulling out the envelope with shaking hands. Detective Walsh's evidence wasn't just about corruption anymore. It was a death sentence, for him, for anyone who possessed it, and now potentially for Sophia. But as Maria stared at the photographs of murdered witnesses, of evidence bags that had mysteriously disappeared, of crime scenes that had been sanitized before proper investigation, she realized something else. This evidence wasn't just dangerous, it was powerful. Powerful enough that they'd killed a decorated detective to bury it. Powerful enough that they were willing to threaten a child. Which meant it might be powerful enough to protect her family, if she could figure out how to use it. Maria's hands trembled as she stared at the photograph in the dim storage unit light. The image showed a man in an expensive suit shaking hands with someone whose face had been deliberately scratched out with a key or knife. Behind them stood a construction site with a partially visible sign that read Riverside Development Project. She recognized the man in the suit immediately. City Councilman Richard Hayes had been all over the local news for months, championing affordable housing initiatives and promising to clean up corruption in city planning. His campaign posters still dotted street corners throughout her neighborhood. But this photo told a different story. Maria flipped through more documents, her heart pounding with each page. Bank statements showing massive cash deposits into offshore accounts. Blueprints for the Riverside project with handwritten notes in the margins detailing bribes and kickbacks. A typed letter on official city letterhead outlining how environmental impact studies would be falsified. The deeper she dug, the clearer the picture became. Someone had been systematically documenting a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of city government. The Riverside Development Project wasn't just another housing complex. It was being built on contaminated land, with safety inspections bought and paid for, environmental reports fabricated. Families would move into those apartments thinking they were getting a fresh start. Instead, they'd be poisoning their children. Just like her family had been poisoned by a system that didn't care about people like them. Maria's phone buzzed. A text from Carmen. Elena's asking where you are. Everything okay? She quickly typed back, running errands. Home soon. But she couldn't leave. Not yet. Each document she uncovered made the stakes higher, the conspiracy deeper. There were invoices for cleanup crews, but the dates didn't match the construction timeline. Payment records to city inspectors who had apparently never set foot on the actual site. Communications between Hayes and someone identified only as the client discussing how to handle problems. Then she found the medical records. 3 workers from the original Riverside site had been hospitalized with severe chemical burns and respiratory distress. According to the documents, they'd been drilling into what they thought was stable ground when they hit pockets of toxic waste, industrial chemicals that had been illegally dumped decades earlier. Instead of halting construction and properly remediating the site, the records showed payments to the workers' families and forged documents declaring the land safe for residential development. All 3 workers had died within 6 months. Maria sat back on her heels, overwhelmed. This wasn't just corruption, it was murder. And whoever had compiled this evidence had risked everything to document it. The storage unit wasn't just hiding random documents, it was an insurance policy, a dead man's switch left behind by someone who knew they were in danger. Her phone rang, making her jump. Unknown number. Hello? She answered cautiously. Silence on the other end, then a click. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. She quickly gathered the most damning documents and stuffed them into the manila envelope she'd brought for her grandmother's things. The rest she carefully repositioned exactly as she'd found them. As she prepared to leave, something caught her eye. In the corner of one photograph, partially hidden behind construction equipment, was a car. The license plate was barely visible, but she could make out enough numbers to know it wasn't random. She'd seen that car before. Yesterday, parked across from Elena's school. Maria's blood ran cold. She grabbed her phone and called Carmen. Pick up, she whispered. Maria? What's wrong? You sound... Are you at home? Are the girls with you? Yes, they're doing homework in the kitchen. Maria, you're scaring me. Lock the doors. Don't let anyone in. I'm coming home now. What happened? Did someone... Just do it, Carmen. Please. Maria secured the storage unit and practically ran to her car, clutching the envelope of evidence. Every shadow seemed threatening, every passing car a potential danger. She'd stumbled into something massive, and if the wrong people knew she had this information, her family would pay the price. As she drove through familiar streets, her mind raced through options. The police were compromised. That much was clear from the documents. City officials couldn't be trusted. The media might be her best bet, but how could she verify which reporters weren't already bought and paid for? She pulled into a driveway and sat for a moment, looking at her small house with new eyes. 24 hours ago, her biggest worry had been paying rent. Now she possessed evidence that could bring down half the city government, but using it might get her killed. Through the kitchen window, she could see Elena bent over her homework, completely unaware that her mother had just crossed a line there was no coming back from. Maria gripped the envelope tighter and made her choice. Maria's hands trembled as she stared at the photographs spread across her kitchen table. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across the faces of men in expensive suits, their expressions cold and calculating. Detective Morrison had been gone for an hour, but his warnings still echoed in her mind. These people don't leave witnesses. She gathered the photos into a neat stack, her fingers lingering on the one showing Vincent Castellano shaking hands with a man she now recognized from news reports as Judge Harold Brennan. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 days before the judge had dismissed a major racketeering case against Castellano's organization. The burner phone Morrison had given her sat silent on the counter. He'd promised to call within 24 hours with a plan, but every minute that passed felt like an eternity. Maria glanced at the clock, 11:47 p.m. Sophia had been asleep for hours, blissfully unaware that their world was teetering on the edge of collapse. Soft scraping sound from the front porch made her freeze. The noise came again, deliberate and careful. Maria's heart hammered as she quickly scooped up the photographs and documents, shoving them into the manila envelope. She crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. A figure stood in the shadows across the street, the ember of a cigarette glowing in the darkness. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out a second person near the corner, partially concealed behind a parked car. They weren't making any effort to hide their presence, which somehow made it more terrifying. Maria backed away from the window, clutching the envelope to her chest. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We know what you found. Bring everything to Pier 19 at midnight. Come alone, or your daughter pays the price." The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. Pier 19 was only 15 minutes away, in the industrial district where the old warehouses cast long shadows over the waterfront. She had 13 minutes to decide whether to trust Morrison's promise of protection or face whatever waited for her in the darkness. Another text arrived, "No police. We're watching." Maria ran to Sophia's room and found her daughter sleeping peacefully, her small hands clutched around her favorite stuffed rabbit. The sight of Sophia's innocent face made her decision easier. Whatever happened tonight, she wouldn't let these monsters touch her child. She grabbed her jacket and the envelope, then slipped out through the back door into the alley. The night air was thick with fog rolling in from the bay, muffling sounds and turning familiar streets into an alien landscape. Maria kept to the shadows, taking a circuitous route toward the waterfront while constantly checking over her shoulder. The pier jutted out into the black water like a skeletal finger. Security lights created pools of yellow illumination every 50 feet, but the spaces between them were pitch black. Maria's footsteps echoed off the wooden planks as she walked toward the end of the pier, where a figure waited in the darkness. As she drew closer, the man stepped into the light. He was tall and lean, with silver hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his eyes. She recognized him immediately from the photographs. Vincent Castellano himself. "Miss Santos," he said, his voice cultured and surprisingly gentle. "Thank you for coming. I trust you brought what belongs to me." Maria held up the envelope but didn't extend it toward him. "Let me guess. You killed Jimmy Torelli because he was going to expose your arrangement with Judge Brennan." Castellano's smile was razor thin. Jimmy was a romantic. He believed in justice, truth, all those quaint concepts. Unfortunately, his conscience became inconvenient for certain business relationships. "And now you want to kill me to protect those same relationships." "Kill you?" Castellano looked genuinely surprised. "Miss Santos, you misunderstand my intentions entirely. I'm here to offer you a job." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "You're resourceful, desperate, and you have a daughter to protect. Those are valuable qualities in my organization. I'm offering you $50,000 to destroy those documents and forget what you've seen, plus a monthly salary that would solve all your financial problems." Maria's mind reeled. $50,000 would pay off her debts, cover Sophia's medical expenses, and give them a fresh start. But she thought of Jimmy Torelli's sister, still waiting for answers about her brother's death. "And if I refuse?" Castellano's expression didn't change, but something darker flickered in his eyes. "Then we have a problem. You see, Miss Santos, I've built my reputation on the principle that certain secrets must never see daylight. I protect that principle at all costs." The fog swirled around them, and Maria became aware of movement in the shadows beyond the pier. She wasn't alone with Castellano. His men were positioned throughout the area, cutting off any escape route. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. Morrison's promised call, arriving exactly when she needed it most. Maria's hands trembled as she stared at the photograph in her lap. The warehouse behind her apartment complex looked different 15 years ago, newer, with fresh paint and clear signage. But it was definitely the same building where she'd lived for the past 3 years, where Danny played in the courtyard every afternoon. The photo showed 3 men in expensive suits standing beside a white van. 2 she didn't recognize, but the third made her stomach clench. Even younger and with more hair, she knew that face from countless campaign posters and news segments. Councilman Robert Hayes, now the city's most prominent voice on urban development and crime prevention. She flipped the photo over. Someone had written in faded blue ink, Hayes, Morrison, Chen, final delivery, October 15th, 2008. The date meant nothing to her, but the implications were staggering. Whatever Hayes was involved in 15 years ago, whatever had gotten Thomas Brennan killed, it was connected to her home. Her son had been playing on ground that held buried secrets. Her phone buzzed. A text from Elena, "Where are you? Danny's asking for you." Maria's heart clenched. She'd been gone for hours, chasing shadows while her son worried. She quickly typed back, "Coming home soon. Kiss him for me." But as she started to gather the documents, another photograph caught her attention. This one showed the same warehouse but taken from inside. Stacks of wooden crates filled the space, and several men in coveralls were loading them onto dollies. The image quality was poor, clearly taken from a hidden position, but she could make out numbers stenciled on the crate sides. A shipping manifest tucked beneath the photo listed the same numbers alongside cryptic descriptions: medical supplies, research samples, disposal required. Each entry was initialed TB Thomas Brennan. Maria felt pieces clicking into place. Brennan hadn't just been documenting corruption, he'd been gathering evidence of something being stored at her warehouse, something that required disposal, something worth killing for. The library's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she photographed each document with her phone, her hands steadier now that she had a purpose. Whatever Brennan had discovered, she needed to understand it completely before deciding her next move. She was sliding the last photograph into her bag when footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that didn't match the usual shuffle of library patrons. Maria's pulse quickened as she remembered the dark sedan, the feeling of being watched. Moving quickly but quietly, she gathered everything and headed for the back exit. The emergency door would set off an alarm, but that seemed preferable to encountering whoever was climbing those stairs with such determination. As she pushed through the door, the alarm shrieked behind her. Maria didn't look back. She ran through the library's rear parking lot, clutching the bag of evidence, and didn't stop until she reached the bus stop 3 blocks away. On the ride home, she forced herself to think clearly. The photographs and documents were explosive, but they were also 15 years old. Whatever had happened at the warehouse, it was long over. The question was whether revealing Brennan's evidence would bring justice or just paint a bigger target on her family. Her phone rang as the bus pulled up to her stop. Unknown number. Hello? Silence, then a man's voice, calm and professional. "Miss Santos, I think we need to talk." Maria's blood turned to ice. Who is this? Someone who knows you've been asking questions about things that don't concern you. Someone who would prefer to resolve this situation amicably. The bus doors opened with a hydraulic hiss. Maria remained seated, gripping the phone. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The storage unit, Miss Santos. The items you found. You're in over your head, and your son deserves a mother who makes smart choices." The threat was delivered in the same calm tone, but it hit her like a physical blow. They knew about Danny. "What do you want?" she whispered. "To help you forget about Thomas Brennan and his old obsessions. Some stories are better left buried, don't you think? For everyone's sake." Through the bus window, Maria saw her apartment building, saw the playground where Danny spent his afternoons. The warehouse loomed behind it, ordinary and innocent-looking in the afternoon light. "I need time to think," she managed. "Of course, 24 hours should be sufficient. And, Miss Santos, don't do anything dramatic. The police have more important things to worry about than old conspiracy theories from a troubled man. We wouldn't want them to get the wrong impression about how you're raising your son." The line went dead. Maria sat on the empty bus, watching her building grow smaller as it continued its route. She had evidence that could destroy powerful people, but they had something more valuable, the ability to take away everything that mattered to her. Maria's hands trembled as she stared at the phone number Detective Hayes had given her. 3 days had passed since their meeting at the diner, and the weight of the evidence hidden in her closet felt heavier with each passing hour. Every creak in the apartment made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hold watching eyes. She glanced at Sophia, who was coloring at the kitchen table, her tongue poking out in concentration as she filled in a princess dress with bright purple crayon. The normalcy of the moment felt surreal against the storm brewing in Maria's mind. The knock at the door made her heart stop. Maria peered through the peephole and saw a woman in an expensive navy suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. Behind her stood a man in a dark coat, his hands clasped behind his back like military personnel. Neither looked like anyone from their building. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" The woman's voice was smooth, professional. "My name is Catherine Morse. I'm an attorney. I'd like to discuss a matter of mutual interest." Maria kept the chain lock engaged as she cracked the door open. "I don't need a lawyer." "Perhaps not," Catherine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "But you do have something that belongs to my client. Something that was taken from a storage unit that was sold in error." The blood drained from Maria's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Unit 247. You purchased it 3 days ago for $50. Catherine's voice remained pleasant, conversational. "There was a mix-up with the payments. My client had been current on his fees, but due to a banking error, the unit was auctioned prematurely." Sophia looked up from her coloring. "Mummy, who's at the door?" "Just some people selling something, Mija. Keep coloring." Catherine's smile widened. "Beautiful daughter. Sophia, right? 7 years old, attends Roosevelt Elementary. Such a lovely school, though I hear the crossing guard position has been vacant since Mrs. Henderson retired." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maria's grip tightened on the door handle. "What do you want?" "As I mentioned, my client simply wants his property returned. Some personal items of sentimental value that were mistakenly included in the unit. Old photographs, documents, that sort of thing. Nothing that would be worth anything to anyone else." The man behind Catherine shifted slightly, his coat opening just enough to reveal the shoulder holster underneath. Catherine noticed Maria's gaze and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "I'm sure you kept anything that seemed important," Catherine said. "You strike me as a thorough person, a survivor. I respect that. My client is prepared to compensate you generously for your time and trouble. Say $10,000 for the return of these items?" $10,000. The number hit Maria like a physical blow. It was more money than she'd seen in years, enough to catch up on rent, buy Sophia new clothes, maybe even put something aside for emergencies. "I need to think about it," Maria said. "Of course, though I should mention that my client is quite anxious to resolve this matter quickly. He's a private person, you understand. Doesn't like his personal affairs scattered about." Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "My number. I'll expect your call by tomorrow evening." As the two figures walked away, Maria noticed how the man's eyes swept the hallway, memorizing details. She double-locked the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. "Mummy, are you okay?" Sophia had abandoned her coloring and was standing beside her, brown eyes wide with concern. "Yes, baby, everything's fine." Maria knelt down and pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "How about we have a movie night tonight? We can make popcorn and watch that princess movie you love." Sophia's face lit up, the strange visitors already forgotten. "Can we make the kind with butter?" "Of course." As Sophia skipped back to her coloring, Maria's mind raced. $10,000 would solve their immediate problems, but she knew with sickening certainty that taking the money would only buy temporary safety. People like Catherine Morse and her silent companion didn't make one-time deals. They collected debts, and the interest was always higher than anyone could pay. She looked at Detective Hayes's card, then at Catherine's. 2 different paths, both dangerous, but one thing was clear: doing nothing was no longer an option. The choice had been made for her the moment she'd opened that storage unit. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the city, and Maria felt the first drops of rain against the window, like tears she couldn't afford to shed. The abandoned warehouse stood like a skeletal monument against the grey morning sky, its broken windows staring down at Maria as she sat in her car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Detective Hayes had chosen this location for their meeting, claiming it was neutral ground where they could examine the evidence without surveillance. But everything about this felt wrong. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Kids asking when you'll be home. Everything okay?" Maria typed back quickly, "Soon. Kiss them for me." She hesitated, then added, "If something happens, there's a key taped under the mailbox. Important papers in the shoebox in my closet." Before she could lose her nerve, she deleted the last part and sent only the first message. Hayes emerged from the shadows of the building's entrance, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He looked different somehow, older, more tired. As he approached her car, Maria noticed how his eyes swept the perimeter constantly, like a man expecting trouble. "You brought everything?" he asked through her rolled-down window. "Most of it. The rest is somewhere safe." The lie came easier now. She'd learned to be cautious, even with those claiming to help her. Hayes nodded toward the building. "There's someone who needs to see what you found. Someone who can help us understand what we're dealing with." "Who?" "Federal prosecutor. She's been investigating Blackwood Industries for months, but could never get the evidence to stick. What you found could change everything." Maria stepped out of the car, clutching the manila envelope containing copies of select documents. She'd kept the originals hidden, along with the photographs and financial records. Trust had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Inside the warehouse, dusty light filtered through the broken windows, creating long shadows between abandoned machinery. Their footsteps echoed in the vast space as Hayes led her toward a makeshift office area where metal chairs surrounded a folding table. A woman in her 50s sat waiting, her silver hair pulled back severely, wearing a navy suit that looked expensive even in the dim light. She stood as they approached, extending a manicured hand. "Miss Santos, I'm Assistant District Attorney Catherine Winters. Detective Hayes tells me you've stumbled onto something significant." Maria shook her hand, studying the woman's face. There was something familiar about her, though she couldn't place it. "I'm not sure what I've stumbled onto. I just know people are willing to kill for it." Winters gestured for them to sit. "Show me what you have." Maria opened the envelope and spread the documents across the table. She watched Winters' face carefully as the prosecutor examined each page, looking for any telltale sign of recognition or deception. "These financial records," Winters said, pointing to a spreadsheet, "they show payments to city officials, among other things. There are also photographs of meetings, recorded conversations, and what looks like a hit list." Maria didn't mention that she was keeping the most damaging evidence in reserve. Hayes leaned forward. "The storage unit belonged to David Chen, the accountant who died in that car accident 6 months ago. Looks like he was building a case against his own company." "Very convenient accident," Winters murmured, still studying the papers. "Mr. Chen had contacted our office several times, claiming he had evidence of corruption, but he never provided specifics. We assumed he was just a disgruntled employee." Something in her tone made Maria's skin crawl. The words were right, but there was a disconnect, as if Winters was performing rather than responding genuinely. "What happens now?" Maria asked. "We build a case. This is exactly what we needed to move forward with indictments." Winters began gathering the documents. "I'll need to keep these as evidence. Those are copies," Maria said quickly. "I'm keeping the originals safe." Winters' smile faltered for just a moment. "Of course. Though eventually we'll need everything for the trial." Hayes checked his watch. "We should get moving. The longer we stay in one place—" A sound from the warehouse entrance cut him off. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose across the concrete floor. Hayes was on his feet instantly, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Expecting company?" Maria whispered to Winters, but the prosecutor's face had gone pale. "Get down," Hayes hissed, but it was too late. 3 men in dark suits emerged from behind the machinery, weapons drawn. Maria recognized one of them from the photograph she'd found. Vincent Cross, Blackwood's head of security. "Nobody move," Cross called out, his voice echoing through the warehouse. "Miss Santos, you've been very difficult to find." Maria's heart hammered as she realized the trap she'd walked into. Her eyes darted between Hayes and Winters, wondering which one had betrayed her, or if both had been compromised from the beginning. Winters stood slowly, her hands visible. "Vincent, this wasn't the plan." "Plans change," Cross replied coldly, "especially when someone keeps copies we don't know about." Maria's hands shook as she stared at the phone number Detective Rodriguez had given her. 3 days had passed since their meeting at the diner, 3 days of jumping at every shadow, checking the locks twice, watching Emma sleep, and wondering if they'd wake up to find strangers in their apartment. The documents were still hidden in the ventilation shaft above Emma's closet, wrapped in plastic and tucked behind the metal grating. Every time Maria looked toward that corner of the room, her stomach clenched. The evidence felt alive, pulsing with danger even through the walls. She'd tried to return to normal routines, dropped Emma at school, worked her shifts at the diner, smiled at customers who complained about cold coffee while her mind raced through worst-case scenarios. But normal felt like a costume that didn't fit anymore. The black sedan had appeared twice more. Once parked across from Emma's school, Maria had driven around the block 3 times before finally pulling up to the pickup lane. Another time outside the grocery store, engine running, windows tinted too dark to see inside. Both times, by the time Maria worked up the courage to approach or take a photo, the car had vanished. "Mom, you're burning the eggs," Emma said from the kitchen table, her voice cutting through Maria's spiral of worry. Maria blinked, focusing on the pan in front of her. Smoke rose from what had been scrambled eggs but now resembled yellow rubber. She quickly turned off the burner and scraped the mess into the trash. "Sorry, baby. How about cereal instead?" Emma studied her with those perceptive 8-year-old eyes that seemed to see everything. "Are we in trouble? Like police trouble?" The question hit Maria like a physical blow. She'd been so careful, or thought she had been. But Emma was smart, observant. She'd noticed the tension, the way Maria jumped when the phone rang, the nervous glances toward windows and doors. "No," Maria said, then caught herself. She'd promised Emma honesty after too many years of sugarcoating their financial struggles. "Not the kind of trouble you're thinking of. But there's something I need to take care of. Something important." Emma poured milk over her cereal, considering this. "Is it about the storage place? You've been weird ever since you went there." Maria sat across from her daughter, marveling again at how much Emma understood without being told. "Yeah, it's about that. I found something I wasn't supposed to find, and now I have to figure out what to do about it. Like a secret? Like a secret that could help a lot of people, but might be dangerous for us." Emma chewed thoughtfully. "In the movies, the good guys always do the right thing, even when it's scary. Real life isn't like the movies, Em." "I know," Emma said, "but you always told me that just because something is hard doesn't mean we don't do it. Remember when I didn't want to tell Mrs. Patterson that Kevin was cheating off my tests?" Maria remembered. Emma had been torn between not wanting to be a tattletale and knowing that Kevin needed help. Not easy answers. They'd talked for an hour about doing the right thing even when it felt uncomfortable. "This is different," Maria said. "This could affect our whole life. We might have to go away for a while, start over somewhere new." Emma's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Forever? I don't know." They sat in silence, the weight of uncertainty settling between them. Outside, Maria heard the familiar sounds of their neighborhood waking up. Car doors slamming, the garbage truck making its rounds, Mrs. Chen next door calling for her cat. Normal sounds that might soon become memories. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "We know you have something that belongs to us. Return it and no one gets hurt." Maria's blood turned to ice water. She turned the phone face down, but Emma had already seen her expression change. "Mom?" "It's nothing, just—" But the lie died in her throat. If someone was willing to threaten her directly, nowhere was safe, not anymore. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her. 8 years old, gap-toothed smile, hair that never wanted to stay in its ponytail. Emma deserved a normal life, deserved to worry about homework and whether Jake Morrison liked her back, not whether her mother's choices might get them both killed. But she also deserved justice for Dr. Sarah Chen, whose research could save countless lives. Deserved to live in a world where powerful people couldn't bury the truth along with anyone who threatened to expose it. Maria picked up Detective Rodriguez's card and dialed before she could lose her nerve. Rodriguez, it's Maria Santos. I'm ready to talk, but I need guarantees about my daughter's safety. We can arrange protection. No, Maria interrupted. I need her completely out of this. Gone. Safe. That's non-negotiable. A pause. That can be arranged. When? Maria looked at Emma, who was watching with wide, trusting eyes. Tonight. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Maria sat at the metal table, her hands trembling as she stared at the photographs spread before her. Detective Walsh had left her alone with her thoughts for 10 minutes, claiming he needed to make some calls, but she knew he was watching through the one-way mirror. Every instinct screamed at her to demand a lawyer, to stop talking, to protect herself. But Jake's face kept flashing in her mind, his fever breaking just yesterday, his small hand squeezing hers as he'd whispered, "Thank you, Mama, for the medicine that had cost her last $20. The door opened, and Walsh returned with 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of her and settled back into his chair with a heavy sigh. "Maria, I need you to understand something," he said, his voice gentler than before. "The man you found in that storage unit, Marcus Chen, he was a good cop. He was working with internal affairs to expose corruption in the department. These documents you found, they're what got him killed." She wrapped her fingers around the warm cup, drawing what comfort she could from its heat. If he was investigating corruption, why don't you just arrest whoever's involved? Walsh's laugh held no humor. "Because it goes higher than you can imagine. The mayor's office, the district attorney, even some federal judges. Chen was building a case, but he needed ironclad evidence. What you found, those financial records, the photographs, the recordings, that's everything we need. So take it and do whatever you need to do. I just want my family safe." "It's not that simple." Walsh leaned forward, his eyes intense. "The evidence is only part of it. We need testimony from Chen's original source. Someone on the inside who can verify what these documents mean, who can explain the coded transactions and identify the players in those photographs." A cold dread settled in Maria's stomach. "What does that have to do with me?" "Chen's source is a man named Vincent Torres. He disappeared the same night Chen was killed. We've been looking for him for 3 years. Walsh pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. "Does this man look familiar?" Maria's blood turned to ice. Staring back at her from the screen was the face of the man who'd called her yesterday, the voice that had warned her about Kozlov, the person who'd somehow gotten her number. She started, then stopped. Admitting she'd spoken to Torres would mean admitting she hadn't told the police everything. It would mean deeper involvement in something that had already nearly gotten her killed. Walsh studied her face carefully. "Maria, if Torres contacted you, I need to know. He's not just a witness. He's in as much danger as you are. Maybe more." The weight of the decision pressed down on her. Tell the truth and dive deeper into this nightmare, or lie and hope Walsh would somehow sort it out without her. She thought about Sophia, probably sitting in her high school chemistry class right now, unaware that their entire world balanced on a knife's edge. "He called me yesterday," she whispered. "He said Kozlov was coming for me, that I needed to be careful." Walsh's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands tighten slightly around his coffee cup. "What else did he say?" "That people had died for what I found, that I was in over my head." Maria met his eyes. He was right, wasn't he? Did he say where he was? How to contact him? She shook her head. "He said he'd call again when it was safe." Walsh was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Outside the interrogation room, Maria could hear the distant sounds of the police station. Ringing phones, conversations, the squeak of shoes on linoleum. Normal sounds from a normal world that felt impossibly far away. "Maria, I'm going to be straight with you," Walsh finally said. "We can put you in protective custody. New identities for you and your kids, relocation to another state. But it would mean leaving everything behind. Your job, your friends, your life here. And it would mean testifying in federal court against some very dangerous people. And if I don't? Then you go home, and we hope that having the evidence in our possession is enough to keep you safe. But I can't guarantee that. These people have killed to protect their secrets before. The choice hung in the air between them like a blade, safety through erasure of everything they'd built, or the terrible uncertainty of trying to return to normal life while killers walked free. Before she could answer, Walsh's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went pale. "What is it?" Maria asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Walsh looked up at her, and she saw something that terrified her more than all his previous warnings: defeat. "Vincent Torres is dead," he said quietly. "They found his body an hour ago." Maria's hands shook as she stared at the text message from an unknown number. "You have something that doesn't belong to you. Midnight. Pier 19. Come alone, or your daughter learns what happens to children whose mothers make poor choices." The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the motel room's stained carpet. Elena looked up from her homework, concern creasing her young face. "Mama? What's wrong?" "Nothing, Mija. Just work stuff." The lie tasted bitter, but Maria forced a smile. She couldn't let Elena see the terror clawing at her chest, not when they were this close to safety. Detective Rodriguez had promised they were protected. The safe house was supposed to be secure, but somehow they'd found her. The same people who'd killed Thomas Brennan and buried his evidence now had her cornered like a rat in a maze. Maria picked up the phone with trembling fingers and dialed Rodriguez. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Her stomach dropped as she remembered his words from that morning: "I'll be unreachable tonight." "Federal meeting about your case." Perfect timing. Too perfect. She moved to the window and peered through the grimy blinds. The parking lot looked normal. A few scattered cars, a broken streetlight flickering intermittently. But normal had become meaningless. Danger could wear any face now. Elena's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Mama, you're scaring me." Maria turned, seeing her own fear reflected in her daughter's dark eyes. This beautiful girl who trusted her completely, who'd endured their desperate circumstances without complaint, who deserved so much better than a mother who'd stumbled into a nightmare while searching for hope in a storage unit. "Pack your bag," Maria said quietly. "Are we moving again?" "Maybe. I need to take care of something first." Elena's face fell. They'd moved 4 times in the past month, bouncing between Rodriguez's safe houses as the investigation deepened. Each move promised security, but security felt increasingly like an illusion. Or she could go. Face whatever waited at Pier 19. The evidence from the storage unit sat in a federal facility now, but Maria had kept copies, insurance against exactly this scenario. Digital files hidden in cloud accounts these people would never find. It was her only leverage, a single card to play. Elena finished packing, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned not to get attached to places. The sight broke Maria's heart. This wasn't the childhood she dreamed of providing. "I need you to stay with Mrs. Chen tonight," Maria said, referring to the elderly woman next door who'd shown them kindness. "Why? Where are you going?" "To end this." Maria pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Some things you can't run from, Mija. Sometimes you have to stand and fight." "Then let me come with you." "Never." The word came out sharper than intended. Maria softened her voice. "This is grown-up business. Bad grown-up business." She knocked on Mrs. Chen's door, grateful when the woman agreed to watch Elena without questions. As they hugged goodbye, Elena whispered, "Promise you'll come back." "I promise," Maria lied, because sometimes lies were kinder than uncertainty. The drive to Pier 19 passed in a blur of neon and shadows. Maria's old Honda coughed and wheezed, but it carried her toward whatever resolution awaited. She'd printed the digital evidence and brought it along, her offering to whatever devils demanded appeasement. The pier stretched into darkness, waves lapping against rotting pylons. Security lights cast harsh circles that created more shadows than they eliminated. Maria parked and walked toward the water, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. A figure emerged from behind a shipping container, male, tall, wearing a coat despite the warm night. His face remained hidden in shadow. "You came," he said. His voice carried no emotion, as if this midnight negotiation was routine business. "I want my daughter left alone. That depends entirely on you." He gestured toward her purse. "You brought what we discussed?" Maria's hand tightened on the envelope containing printed copies of Thomas Brennan's evidence. "First, I want guarantees." The man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You're hardly in a position to make demands." Behind her, footsteps approached, more than one person. Maria's blood turned to ice as she realized the trap closing around her. The warehouse felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Maria pressed herself against the cold concrete wall, her heart hammering as footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. She'd made it inside through a loading dock window that Detective Torres had left unlocked, just as they'd planned. Now she had to trust that he would keep his end of the bargain. The evidence was supposed to be here, the original files that would prove Senator Blackwood's involvement in the cover-up. Torres had discovered them during his investigation, hidden in an evidence room that officially didn't exist. But getting them out required someone the police department wouldn't suspect, someone like a desperate mother with everything to lose. Maria clutched the small recording device Torres had given her. If this went wrong, at least there would be proof of what really happened. She thought of Sophia sleeping safely at her sister's house, unaware that her mother was walking into what could be a trap. The footsteps grew closer. Maria held her breath and slipped between two towering shelves of cardboard boxes. The beam of a flashlight swept past her hiding spot, and she caught a glimpse of the security guard Torres had warned her about, except this man moved with military precision that suggested he was far more than just a guard. She waited until his footsteps faded before creeping deeper into the warehouse. Torres had described the location. Third row from the back, shelf 7, box marked Municipal Records 1987 to 1992. It sounded simple enough, but the warehouse was a maze of identical shelving units stretching into darkness. Her phone buzzed softly. A text from Torres. "Package delivered to your car. Get out. Now." Maria's blood ran cold. That wasn't the plan. She was supposed to retrieve the evidence herself, not have Torres plant something in her vehicle. Either he was trying to protect her from greater danger, or she'd just walked into an elaborate setup. Before she could process this fully, voices erupted from the front of the warehouse. Multiple men, moving fast, their communications crisp and professional, not police, something else entirely. "Building's locked down," one voice called. "She's in here somewhere." Maria's throat constricted. They were here for her. Torres had either betrayed her or been discovered, and now she was trapped. She thought frantically about the layout Torres had sketched for her. There was a service tunnel that connected to the adjacent building, but reaching it meant crossing 30 yards of open space. The voices were getting closer, along with the systematic sweep of flashlights. Maria realized they weren't just searching, they were herding her toward the back of the warehouse, away from the exits, away from help. She made her decision and broke from cover, sprinting toward where she hoped the service tunnel would be. Shouts erupted behind her as lights blazed to life throughout the warehouse. The hunters had become the hunted, and Maria was the prey. "There!" someone yelled. "North corridor!" Footsteps thundered after her as she weaved between shelving units, her lungs burning. She could see the back wall now, but couldn't spot the tunnel entrance Torres had described. Panic clawed at her chest as she realized she might have misunderstood his directions. A gunshot boomed through the warehouse, the bullet splintering wood inches from her head. These weren't men who planned to arrest her. They were here to permanently silence the woman who'd stumbled onto their buried secrets. Maria dove behind a forklift as more shots rang out. In the chaos, she spotted something Torres had missed, a maintenance ladder leading to an overhead catwalk. It was risky, but it might give her a way to reach the tunnel from above. She scrambled up the ladder as bullets sparked off metal around her. The catwalk stretched across the entire warehouse, but it was narrow and exposed. One slip would mean either a deadly fall or an easy target for the men below. Halfway across, she heard new voices joining the hunt. More men, more guns, more reasons to believe that whoever wanted her dead had resources that went far beyond local corruption. This was bigger than Senator Blackwood, bigger than the storage unit, bigger than anything she'd imagined when she'd bid $50 on someone else's abandoned life. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Torres. "Trust me, jump." Maria looked down at the armed men spreading out below, then at the tunnel that represented her only escape. She thought of Sophia, of the life they'd built together, of all the reasons she'd started this fight in the first place. Sometimes survival required a leap of faith. She jumped into the darkness below, praying that Torres hadn't led her into her grave. The warehouse district felt different at 3 in the morning, shadows pooling between buildings like spilled ink. Maria clutched the evidence box against her chest, her heart beat so loud she was certain it would give her away. Detective Sarah Chen moved silently beside her, weapon drawn, eyes scanning the maze of loading docks and industrial facades. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Sarah whispered, checking her watch. They had exactly 7 minutes before the scheduled meeting with Agent Morrison, assuming he was still alive to make it. Maria nodded toward a rusted sign barely visible in the darkness. Hartwell Logistics. That's what was on the shipping manifests. She shifted the box, feeling the weight of 20 years' worth of corruption pressing against her ribs. If Judge Castellanos is coming himself, this has to be where it all started. They approached the building's side entrance, a heavy steel door marked with faded warnings about authorized personnel. Sarah tested the handle, unlocked. She held up 3 fingers, counting down silently before pushing it open. The interior stretched into blackness, punctuated only by thin streams of moonlight filtering through grimy windows high above. The smell hit them immediately. Motor oil, rust, and something else. Something that made Sarah's grip tighten on her weapon. "Jesus," Maria breathed, covering her nose. Sarah clicked on her flashlight, sweeping the beam across the warehouse floor. Empty shipping containers stood in neat rows, but it was the walls that made her stomach turn. Photos, hundreds of them, tacked up like a sick gallery. Crime scenes, newspaper clippings, police reports, and faces. So many faces of people who had gotten too close to the truth. "Tommy was right," Sarah said, studying a cluster of photos near the entrance. "This isn't just about money. It's about power. Control." She paused at a newspaper clipping dated 18 months ago. "Look at this." Maria leaned closer, squinting at the headline, "City Councilman Dies in Apparent Suicide." Below it, someone had written in red ink, "Problem solved." How many people have they killed? Maria's voice cracked. She thought of Emma, safe at her sister's house, hopefully sleeping peacefully without knowing her mother was standing in the middle of a murder museum. A sound echoed from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. Footsteps on concrete. Sarah immediately switched off her flashlight, plunging them back into darkness. They pressed against the wall, hearts hammering in unison. "You're early," a familiar voice called out. Agent Morrison emerged from behind a shipping container, looking haggard but alive. "Good. We don't have much time." "Morrison?" Sarah kept her weapon raised. "How do we know you're not compromised?" He laughed bitterly, pulling back his jacket to reveal a blood-stained bandage across his torso. "Because they tried to kill me 6 hours ago. Barely made it out of my apartment alive." He gestured toward the wall of photos. "Welcome to the real operation." Hartwell Logistics has been their front for 2 decades. Every suicide, every accident, every witness who disappeared, it was all coordinated from here. Maria stepped forward, still clutching the evidence box. "Judge Castellanos is on his way, along with Commissioner Bradley and at least 3 other people whose names would make your blood run cold." Morrison checked his watch. They think they're coming to collect evidence and clean up loose ends. What they don't know is that I've been working with internal affairs for 8 months, building a case. 8 months? Sarah lowered her weapon slightly. Why didn't you? Because I couldn't trust anyone. Hell, I still can't be sure about you. Morrison's eyes were haunted. Do you have any idea how deep this goes? Police, judges, city officials, federal agents. They've got people everywhere. The sound of car engines outside made them all freeze. Morrison cursed under his breath. They're early too. We need those documents now. Maria's hands shook as she opened the evidence box. There's something else you should know. I found a second storage unit. Unit 247. There are bodies there, Morrison. Actual bodies. Christ! Morrison ran a hand through his disheveled hair. How many? At least 3 that I could see. All wrapped in plastic, all with bullet holes. Maria pulled out the most damaging files. The shipping manifests show regular waste disposal runs to a quarry outside the city. Sarah's radio crackled to life. Units in position, a voice reported. Subjects approaching the building. Morrison smiled grimly. That would be my backup. Real backup this time. He took the files from Maria, scanning them quickly. This is it. This is everything we need. Car doors slammed outside, followed by urgent voices. Judge Castellanos and his Kio conspirators had arrived, walking directly into the trap Morrison had spent months preparing. Now what? Maria asked, her voice barely a whisper. Morrison headed toward the rear exit, motioning for them to follow. Now we let them incriminate themselves, while federal agents record every word. And then we watch their entire empire burn. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decay, its broken windows casting fractured moonlight across the concrete floor. Maria clutched the flash drive in her sweating palm, her heart hammering against her ribs as she peered through a gap in the loading dock door. Detective Hayes had chosen this place for their meeting, claiming it was the only location where they could safely transfer the evidence without Caldwell's network intercepting them. But something felt wrong. Hayes stood in the center of the cavernous space, his silhouette rigid against the pale light filtering through the skylights. He kept checking his watch, pacing in tight circles that reminded Maria uncomfortably of a predator stalking prey. When he'd called an hour ago, his voice had carried an urgency that bordered on panic, insisting they meet immediately rather than wait for morning. "You're late," Hayes called out when Maria finally stepped into the open. His voice echoed off the walls, creating phantom whispers in the shadows. "I had to make sure Sophia was safe," Maria replied, staying near the exit. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was their only chance to expose Caldwell and end the nightmare that had consumed her life since she'd bought that storage unit. Hayes approached slowly, his hand resting on his service weapon. "Do you have it? The drive?" Maria nodded but didn't move closer. In the dim light, she could see sweat beading on Hayes's forehead despite the cool night air. His eyes darted constantly to the shadows, as if expecting company. "Detective, are you all right? You seem—" "Just give me the drive, Maria." His voice had changed, taking on a harder edge that made her blood run cold. "We need to get this to the FBI before Caldwell realizes what we have." The words should have been reassuring, but his tone carried no warmth. Maria's grip tightened on the flash drive as pieces of a terrible puzzle began clicking into place. Hayes had known exactly where to find evidence in the storage unit. He'd appeared at precisely the right moments, always one step ahead of Caldwell's men. And now, in this isolated warehouse, his mask was finally slipping. "How long have you been working for him?" Maria asked quietly. Hayes went perfectly still. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the broken windows. When he finally looked up, his expression had transformed completely. The concerned detective was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "Smart girl," he said, drawing his weapon with practiced ease. "Too smart for your own good." Maria's legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stand tall. "The phone calls to my apartment. The men following me, you coordinated all of it. Caldwell needed to know how much you discovered. I was supposed to get close, gain your trust, and recover the evidence quietly. But you made that impossible when you started making copies and hiding them in multiple locations. Hayes stepped closer, his gun trained on her chest. Do you have any idea how much money you've cost us? How many people have died because you couldn't mind your own business? People like Jennifer Walsh? Maria's voice cracked on the name. Like Detective Morrison? Hayes' face darkened. Morrison was getting too close. He would have ruined everything we've built. 20 years of careful planning, millions in revenue, all threatened by one honest cop who couldn't be bought. The admission hit Maria like a physical blow. She thought of Morrison's wife, his children, the funeral she'd watched from across the street. All because he'd tried to do the right thing. And now you're going to kill me too, she said. I don't want to, Hayes replied, and for a moment she almost believed he meant it. But you've made it impossible. Give me the drive and tell me where you've hidden the copies. Maybe we can work something out. Maria's hand moved slowly toward her jacket pocket, but instead of the flash drive, her fingers found her phone. With one swift motion, she activated the live stream she'd set up before leaving her apartment. The phone's camera captured Hayes clearly in the moonlight, his weapon drawn, his confession still echoing in the air. I'm afraid I can't do that, she said, holding the phone where he could see it. But I think about 50,000 people just heard everything you said. Hayes's face went white as he realized what had happened. The live stream counter showed viewers multiplying by the second, comments flooding in from people who recognized both their faces from recent news coverage. You stupid! Hayes raised his weapon, but the sound of approaching sirens cut through the night air, multiple units, growing louder by the second. Maria had sent the warehouse location to every news outlet in the city before arriving, along with instructions to call the state police if her stream went dark. Hayes spun toward the exits, but flashing lights already surrounded the building. The evidence that had started in a $50 storage unit was finally going to see daylight. The courthouse steps felt like ice beneath Maria's feet as she climbed toward the heavy oak doors, Detective Chen at her side and Jake's small hand gripped tightly in hers. The manila envelope containing copies of everything, photos, documents, financial records, pressed against her ribs from inside her jacket. 3 weeks had passed since that terrifying night when Vincent Castellanos' men had torn through her apartment, and now the moment of truth had finally arrived. Remember, Chen murmured as they approached the metal detectors, once we're inside, everything changes. No going back. Maria nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The grand jury had been convened in secret, the district attorney's office working around the clock to build their case. But she knew that somewhere in this very building, Castellanos' lawyers were already positioning themselves for battle. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected, filled with serious-faced men and women who would decide whether her discovery in that $50 storage unit would finally bring justice or merely paint a larger target on her family's back. As she took her seat in the witness chair, Maria caught sight of a familiar face in the gallery. Vincent Castellanos himself, immaculately dressed and radiating the kind of quiet menace that had haunted her nightmares. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor instructed, her voice echoing in the hushed chamber. "Maria Elena Vasquez." The words came out stronger than she felt. For the next 2 hours, Maria recounted everything. The storage unit auction, the hidden compartment beneath the garbage, the photographs of Senator Bradford accepting bundles of cash. She described the spreadsheets documenting years of laundered money, the bank routing numbers, the careful records that someone, she now knew it was Bradford's former accountant, Thomas Murphy, had kept as insurance. When the prosecutor held up the photograph that had started it all, several jury members leaned forward in their seats. The image was grainy but unmistakable, Bradford's distinctive profile, his hand reaching for an envelope thick with bills, Castellanos' younger self smiling in the background. "And you're certain this photograph was among the materials you found?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes." along with dozens of others spanning nearly 15 years. Castellanos' attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit, rose for cross-examination with predatory grace. "Miss Vasquez, isn't it true that you were facing eviction when you purchased this storage unit?" "Yes." "And that you were desperate for money to support your son?" Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was struggling financially, yes. Struggling enough to fabricate evidence if you thought it might lead to a substantial reward." Detective Chen tensed in his seat, but Maria kept her composure. "I didn't fabricate anything. I found those documents and photographs exactly as I described." "You can't prove that, can you? You have no way of demonstrating that you didn't plant this evidence yourself, hoping to cash in on a scandal." The prosecutor objected, but the damage was done. Maria could see doubt creeping into some of the jurors' expressions. This was exactly what she'd feared, that her desperation would be used against her, that the truth would be buried under accusations and character assassination. But then something unexpected happened. The courtroom doors opened, and a thin man in an ill-fitting suit walked in, flanked by two federal marshals. Whispers rippled through the gallery as he made his way to the front of the room. "Your Honor," the prosecutor announced, "the state calls Thomas Murphy." Maria's breath caught. Murphy, the accountant whose meticulous records she'd discovered, was supposed to be dead, killed in what police had ruled a random mugging 3 years ago. But here he was, very much alive, his face bearing the weathered look of someone who'd been living in hiding. Murphy's testimony was devastating. He confirmed every detail of Maria's discovery, explaining how he'd kept the evidence as protection against Castellanos and Bradford's network. He described the fake death, the federal witness protection that had kept him hidden until Maria's courage had finally given prosecutors the leverage they needed to bring him in safely. As Murphy spoke, Maria watched Castellanos' face transform from confident smugness to barely controlled rage. The man who had seemed so untouchable just hours ago now looked like what he truly was, a criminal watching his empire crumble. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned with indictments for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy, Maria felt 3 years of fear finally lift from her shoulders. Outside the courthouse, Jake tugged at her jacket. "Mama, does this mean the bad men can't hurt us anymore?" Maria looked down at her son, then up at the afternoon sky where storm clouds were finally breaking apart to reveal patches of blue. For the first time in months, the future felt like something she could build rather than something she merely had to survive. "Yes, baby," she whispered, pulling him close. "We're safe now. We're finally safe."